I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Thom Tillis discussed NATO in light of Russia's war in Ukraine on the Senate floor Tuesday. Tillis said that Putin's invasion, quote, may go down as the greatest miscalculation in this century. At the end of last month, NATO formally invited Finland and Sweden to join the military alliance. This was a historic move for the neutral nations in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Take a listen for more from the North Carolina Republican.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Shaheen, my colleagues on the floor here, Senators Coons, Ernst, Blunt, and the others who joined the bipartisan delegation at the NATO summit. It was an extraordinary opportunity to see firsthand how the democratic world looks to the United States for leadership. It was an extraordinary opportunity to talk about Russia's aspirations. It was an extraordinary opportunity to talk about what I think may go down as the greatest miscalculation in this century on the part of Vladimir Putin. Months ago, when he was massing troops at the Ukrainian border, he called it a special military operation, a training exercise for a little while. What he was thinking in the back of his head, that now was the time to test NATO's resolve. Now was the time to see if the differences that we have was enough to break an alliance. What he found out was quite the opposite. Shortly after February the 24th, the NATO countries came together, the EU came together, we implemented sanctions, we provided troops on the ground to assist with the evacuation of Ukrainian refugees, and now we're in a position of providing support for the very courageous members of the Ukrainian military. And what else did he get for his miscalculation? Two nations that for decades have been non-aligned, Sweden and Finland. 830 miles of Russian border is now about to be the back door or the front yard of NATO. And when Finland and Sweden ultimately get membership in NATO, which I expect to be in weeks or months, then Vladimir Putin needs to understand his reward for invading a sovereign nation is 830 miles of NATO borders right next door. Now I want to talk a little bit about Finland and Sweden. They're extraordinary countries, advanced democracies, the rule of law, a great defense industrial base in Sweden, home to Saab. They manufacture jet fighters that are NATO interoperable. Finland, which is already spending at the 2% threshold for NATO and wanting to go further. Finland has 64 joint strike fighters on order. If the United States was going to have as many, they're a nation of about 5.5 million people. If the United States was going to have as many F-35s as Finland on a per capita basis, we would need thousands of them. We've got less than 200. They are committed to defense. They're a strong army, a strong ground force. Russia knows that. Just look back to 1939. And then in Sweden, we have a defense industrial base and a navy that covers the Arctic. It covers the Baltics. They're going to be net contributors of security the day that they get NATO membership. Now, I had somebody a couple of weeks ago, from time to time I go to the front office and I take calls from constituents. I had someone call up and say, why are you focused on Ukraine? Why are you focused on Finland and Sweden when we've got so many things that we need to do back here at home? I said, we have to do both, because the future of our safety and our freedom at home is intrinsically linked to the safety and security of Europe. This weekend, I was moving some furniture around. I came across the globe I've had for 40 years. It has a picture of the Soviet Empire on it. Vladimir Putin wants to recreate that and expand it. This doesn't end, and I told this caller this, it doesn't end in Ukraine. It's one step of several chess moves that Vladimir Putin would like to play out and ultimately dominate the free world. We can't let that happen. Now, when we were at the NATO summit, I think it was very clear, at least to me, that those that we met with, the heads of state, feel like now more than ever is the time that America has to lead. That America has to understand the threats that exist, a rising China, a threatening Russia, a malign group of leaders in Iran. Now is the time for us to look outward and preserve the free world. How do we do that? We make NATO stronger. We admit Sweden we admit Finland, and we continue to work together to recognize emerging threats in the Pacific Rim. So I think at the end of the day, to the American citizen who's wondering, why do we worry about NATO? Why do we worry about Ukraine? Because it is directly linked to the future of our sovereignty and our safety here at home. I want to thank the President for his contribution at NATO as well. We met for him for about an hour last week. We had a press conference a little later in the day, and people wanted to ask us about domestic policies. I said, we're a bipartisan group here to talk about our commitment to NATO and our commitment to having Putin fail in Ukraine. We can have our differences back home, but there is no daylight between the Republicans and the Democrats who were on that Code L with respect to the future of our commitment to NATO and the future to our commitment to the free world. So with that, I hope that we will move swiftly to pass the treaty, to be one of the first to recognize that we want and welcome Sweden and Finland into the NATO alliance. And then we need to continue to remind people at home why it's important. Although it's not in our backyard, it's in a part of the world that if we let this stand, if we don't act with unity, then we will live to regret it. Thank you.
Mr. President.